Hi, everyone. Happy Monday. So great to see you all. I hope everyone had a fantastic weekend. I'm so grateful to be sharing this space with you on your lunch hour. I know everyone's busy, so it's just great to know that people are really interested in learning about what I believe is such a valuable topic of fostering collegiality through understanding neurodivergence and how to best support our colleagues that think and learn differently from all of us. I am so excited to welcome you all here today with the Disability Staff and Faculty Association group here on campus that does remarkable work to foster an inclusive environment for everyone here at all three of our campuses. So we have some amazing, talented, and knowledgeable folks that will be taking us through an informative presentation, offering you best practices on how you can support those that you work with, and also better ways to educate yourself so you can just show up as a better person both inside and outside of the workplace. But I did want to kick us off with some introductions. For those of you that have not met me, my name is Tiana Cole, and I'm the president of the professional staff organization for this year. And we are so excited to be able to advocate on behalf of all of the staff at all three of our campus locations for you all and to communicate the needs and concerns that you have to be able to advance equity and promote inclusion on our campuses. And many of our opportunities here available are educational programming for you all, covering different topics. So one of those for us is our DEI topics. And this was a popular one that arose out of many conversations where people just wanted to learn more. So that's why I invited this amazing group of folks here. But I will turn it over to the first person on my screen, which is Christine Liu, who can kick us off.
Yeah, thank you. I think we've actually got a slide in a couple ways down where we'll introduce ourselves. Do you want to go ahead and do the land acknowledgement real quick, Tiana?
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so I did want to kick us off with the land acknowledgement. So the professional staff organization recognizes the people past, present, and future of the Duwamish, Muckleshoot, Snoqualmie, Suquamish, and Tulalip and associated tribes of original Coast Salish peoples whose traditional homelands we occupy. We acknowledge their sovereignty, their right to self-determination, and their sacred spiritual connection to the land and water. We acknowledge past and ongoing trauma, including cultural erasure, violence, forced removal, and systemic oppression. We strive to celebrate and learn from Indigenous methods and ideologies. We work to dismantle oppression and to create a more just and equitable future. I also wanted to throw out that it is Native American Heritage Month in November. So I will be sharing a resource for you all to learn more about how you can honor the land that we are all sitting on and also to just educate yourself about Native American history in the US. So I will drop that into the chat, but then we can move forward.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tiana. We really appreciate that. As mentioned before, hi, I'm Christine. I will introduce myself a little bit more in just a moment, but before we dive in, I wanted to do a couple of quick access notes. There should be Zoom automated captions available by pressing that CC button at the bottom of your screen if you need those. We are going to do a Q&A section at the very end, but we'll keep an eye and see if you have any questions throughout in the chat or in the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. And so if you have any questions, go ahead and put those in there. I recommend putting the questions in the Q&A because they're a lot easier for us to track that way. But if you have comments, reactions, etc., that's what that chat is for. There are slides and resources available that were emailed out to everyone registered, but the link is also in the chat for easy access in case you need those. This is being recorded and will be available afterwards, and so if you need to leave for any reason, we totally understand that. Go ahead and take care of yourself however is needed. And if any access needs are not being met at any point, please do let me know. You can chat me directly, and I am happy to try to facilitate that as best as possible. So with that, I think we'll go into our introductions. Michelle, did you want to start?
Great. Hi, I'm Michelle Garner. I use she, her pronouns. I'm an associate professor of social work at UW-Tacoma. I'm sitting with a blurred backdrop and pale skin and sandy brown hair with more gray than I would like. I am one of the founding members of the Disability Staff and Faculty Association, and I'm currently serving on the leadership and co-chairing the Employee Support Committee and the Change Makers Committee.
Awesome. And then hello again. My name is Christine. I use she, her pronouns. I am the intake coordinator for disability resources for students at UW Seattle, but also overseeing the intake for UW Bothell and UW Tacoma for DRS. I identify as neurodivergent. I have ADHD, and I also identify as disabled. I've done a lot of disability justice advocacy work throughout my career. What was the last piece? Oh, I'm currently chairing the DSFA events committee, and I'm one of the founding members of DSFA.
Awesome. Hello, everyone. My name is Christian Shepard. I use he, him pronouns. I am the director of the Office of Institutional Research at UW Bothell. I identify as neurodivergent in multiple ways. And I joined DSFA. I was not a founding member, but I joined at the initial kickoff, and I am now serving on leadership as the lead for the administration committee.
Great, thanks, Christian. Hi, everyone. My name is Kate Spur, she, her pronouns. I'm a grants manager at the School of Computer Science and Engineering in the Research Administration Department at the University of Washington, Seattle campus. I'm a female presenting white individual. I have pink hair, glasses, and I'm wearing black. I am on the Leadership and Change Makers Committee on the DSFA, and I've been involved in since July of this year. I just wanted to give a disclosure that I am not an academic or medical expert with someone who, but I'm someone with lived experience and a peer who is working to educate peers. I do identify as neurodivergent. I have executive dysfunction and working memory challenges. And a fun fact about me is I have a 5-year-old pug chihuahua, or a chug, named Pearl. Thanks so much. Oh, and yes, I will go over the agenda today, our goals for today. So we're going to first introduce the Disability Staff Faculty Association, or DSFA. We'll define what neurodiversity is. We'll talk about colleagues and work climate matters, and peer-to-peer, what your neurodivergent SFSA peers want you to know, common particulars of neurodiversity, common approaches to success, and Q&A at the end. So a little bit about the Disability Staff and Faculty Association, or DSFA. Excuse me. The DSFA is not just an affinity group. It's a movement towards a more equitable and compassionate University of Washington. Your voice and experiences enrich us all. Please join us on this journey to reshape the University of Washington community for the better. Our mission is, by fostering community connections and offering vital resources together, we can cultivate empowerment and belonging for all. Our aim is more than just mere inclusion. It's about creating a culture that elevates diverse experiences and perspectives. We center the social model of disability and adhere to the principles of disability justice, disability culture, disability allyship, and disability gain. We consider disability, neurodivergence, chronic health, and mental health concerns as valuable facets of diversity. Some of our group norms include varying contributions, which means we respect and celebrate all members of our community by acknowledging and accepting variations in capacity, and by appreciating participation offered without expecting justification for current capacity levels. We value privacy, which means while this group aims to cultivate disability pride, we also recognize that disability can be a highly stigmatizing identity in this world that we live in. Therefore, we respect an individual's choice to disclose or not disclose their disability status, and any disclosures made are kept private unless explicit consent is given to share them. Lastly, grace. Our community is dedicated to fostering and strengthening radically anti-ableist norms and inclusive practices. This involves ongoing and sometimes challenging efforts to identify and address ableist values and tailoring processes to meet ongoing specific needs. Our members are encouraged to be patient and understanding with each other during this learning process.
One of the topics that came up early when we were discussing this was what language and etiquette and nervousness around that can make it hard to engage with people. So on that note, we wanted to reinforce the idea that our norm is around grace with this. And we acknowledge that terminology and practices are evolving and they may be person specific. So enjoying each other and taking a cue from one another. And then lastly, realizing that with our group in particular, some of us may have memory, learning, or processing particulars. That means it may take us quite a while to get it right. So that is our norm and how we proceed with this work. So what are we talking about with regard to neurodiversity? This is out of the NIH style guide and is kind of a nice overview. They prescribe that neurodiversity is the idea that people experience and interact with the world around them in many ways with no one right way of thinking, learning, and behaving, and that differences are not deficits. So neurodiversity refers to the diversity of all people, but it's often used in the context of autism spectrum disorder and other neurological and developmental disorders such as ADHD or dyslexia. So this language can be helpful to use when talking about workplace or classroom accommodations for neurodiverse people. Referring to someone as neurodiverse or neurodivergent is a way to help focus on positive aspects of their differences and what they can bring into the group setting. So neurodivergent people encompass a number of different diagnoses and occur on a continuum. So not everybody that experiences neurodivergence is going to actually carry a specific diagnosis, and there's high overlaps among them. But it's a variation in human experience, again, in the way people move through the world with regard to school, work, and in social relationships. There are both genetic and environmental factors, and we're talking about an estimated 15 to 20% of the population having some degree of neurodivergence. I particularly liked the representation here that breaks out some of the commonalities and places some of the more known diagnoses on here. Thanks, Christian.
Yeah, absolutely. This is Christian speaking, and I realized per Michelle's note that some of us forget things that I forgot to do my visual introduction when I did my visual description when I did my introduction. So I will do that now. I am a white appearing man with a little bit of a beard. I don't know how much of it y'all can see in the Zoom, but a beard, glasses, and I'm wearing a cap. Okay, so every person is unique. And really the point here is that people will have unique profiles of neurodivergence. They can be developmental or acquired. They can be permanent or temporary. Especially the temporary people sometimes don't realize that traumatic brain injury, for example, can be is a form of neurodivergence, and it can be temporary if it's acquired from an injury. It also can be permanent if it's acquired from an injury. There are people such as myself who qualify for multiple neurodivergent diagnoses. They may be those diagnoses may be disabling given the circumstances, or they may not. It really just depends on the person, the individual person, and the circumstances they're in. And we have an example of a neurodivergent spiky cognitive profile where you can see that the darker line here in this graph is neurotypical. You can see it's much flatter, whereas the spiky neurodivergent profile is much higher in verbal skills, lower in working memory, higher in visual skills, lower in processing speed. That is just one example of the kind of profile you might see. You could also see one's vastly different. Also, in addition to diagnosis being complete, being unique, is everyone's individual journey can be unique. So the access to diagnosis is complicated, can be complicated by social class, race, gender, and other forms of intersectionality, the time in history, so the state of the science, someone considering diagnosis versus ascribing a deficit of behavioral attributes, that has to do with, where we are and how some of these diagnoses are seen now versus how they may have been seen 10 or 20 or 30 years ago. One of the important things to note about that is given that there are also a lot of people who may be diagnosed later in life, may have had a neurodivergent condition that they was not recognized until they were later in their life. I personally am one of those people that one of my neurodivergence has only been diagnosed within the past few months. It's also personal acceptance of diagnosis, right? Again, we know this can be a deeply personal matter that can have societal implications and perceptions and biases. So how people accept their diagnosis can vary a lot as well. The meaning of the diagnosis. So again, the current cultural regard as far as stigma or acceptance of a given diagnosis, the personal meaning, the meaning among those around you. And then the status of disability identity, which is a process around personal development and meaning making with the stages of your disability identity.
All right, this is Christine speaking, and Christian mentioned this a little bit earlier, but really wanting to dive into that intersectionality piece. And so first kind of talking about intersectionality around disability in general, not just neurodivergence. This is really, really important to understand that if you are experiencing that ableism, there is a lot of people that are also experiencing this kind of broader intersectional piece of racism as well. And that creates an individual experience of dual discrimination. It makes it so that a lot of people experience discrimination more frequently and even more barriers to that equal participation in the workplace in this context that we're talking about. There's also sort of this like feedback loop, if you will, of environmental factors created by like environmental racism, for example, then create more and more disability among BIPOC populations, for example, and creating that higher prevalence of disability. And then I'm not going to dive into this too far, but there's a distinction between the disability rights movement and the disability justice movement. And one of the reasons for that is because the disability rights movement, which was really prevalent among the time when we were getting things like the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, or prior to that, Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, a lot of the advocacy efforts were led by white disabled people and not necessarily informed by the needs and perspectives of BIPOC disabled people and of a whole bunch of other different intersections. And so a lot of the like advocacy work and the research, et cetera, in the disability space may not actually be super representative of all people with disabilities and the various intersections in that. And then if you can move to the next slide for me, please. That also informs the way that we understand neurodivergence in a very fundamental way, in particular with the intersections around race and ethnicity, gender and sexuality. There is a lot of misunderstanding of how certain symptomology presents. When you look at the research in particular around things like ADHD or autism, a lot of that research was done on like young white boys. And so the behavior and the way in which that presents that then gets stereotyped into what ADHD or autism looks like among all people, when that isn't necessarily true. And so only recently have we started to see a much bigger emergence of research around what neurodivergence looks like. for a variety of different diagnoses among women, for example, femme-presenting people, around, all sorts of things. And not to mention, too, a lot of kids of color end up getting misdiagnosed with things, or underdiagnosed with certain disabilities and more just categorized as having behavioral problems and then sort of segregated out because of that. Whereas like white neurodivergent kids would not necessarily get that label or that sort of hyper surveillance, if you will. This is particularly important to a lot of people. My story, I didn't get diagnosed until way later because I am not white and not a young boy with ADHD. And so, of course, that wouldn't necessarily get seen in a classroom, where my ADHD is a lot more inattentive as opposed to hyperactive. And so if I'm not causing a disruption in the classroom, I'm not necessarily getting pulled out for evaluations, et cetera. That's just one of the examples. Again, as has already been mentioned earlier, this is different for every single person. Every single person's journey is unique, but these are some of the trends and why it's really important to pay attention to that intersectional component.
So we wanted to put this in context for you, right? So big picture for everybody, right? Connection and belonging in the workplace can enhance employee well-being, work productivity, and life satisfaction. And the American Psychological Association studies, part of what came out of their 2024 report was to identify that workers that are experiencing higher levels of psychological safety are more likely to say that they have a sense of belonging, which is important, and that they feel comfortable being themselves at the workplace. I would put kind of a sidebar on that. Part of what I read and hear in that is that they don't feel like they have to mask who they are. They can be authentic and that they're accepted for who they are. My second bullet point down here is that folks that are experiencing high psychological safety are 10 times less likely to say that their workplace is very or somewhat toxic than are those who are experiencing lower levels of psychological safety, which makes sense. Next slide, please. If we then get specific around folks with disability and take a look at this, what we see out of those same data sets are the people who are identifying as having a cognitive, emotional, learning, or mental disability are actually 24%. 24% of them are reporting that they actually do think that their workplace is toxic. And that's compared to 22% of people who identify with having physical disabilities, and only 14% of people who identify as not having disability. So we begin to see that disability really is a variable that over which this data skews, right? Further, folks that have disabilities are more worried than people that don't have disabilities about their compensation being able to keep up. And there's a divergence also on folks reporting about feeling like their company respects their time off, with people with identifying with disabilities being less confident that their employers respect their time off. If we switch over to a different data set, this is coming out of the coach data. And so this is about faculty in higher ed. In particular, what we end up seeing is that people who are reporting, faculty who are reporting disabilities, gosh, that small font, I think it's 28%, and the highest number are folks that are reporting a mental health disorder. Second is learning disability, followed then by mobility impairment or sensory impairment. So this gives you an idea of what kinds of disabilities are present among faculty. And I will underscore that it was only about 7.2% of faculty who participated in the survey reported having a diagnosed disability. And that is smaller than national averages, I would add. Next slide. boring into that same data set, they ask questions again about kind of fit and flow of work. So to the question, I'm satisfied with how well I fit in my department. So that's a proxy for belonging. People with invisible disabilities disagreed at 20, I'm sorry, people with visible disabilities disagreed at 28%. People with invisible disabilities were at 36% disagreement, and that's compared to people that were not identifying with disability at 19%. So again, we see sense of belonging goes down for folks that have disabilities, particularly those that are invisible disabilities. To the question, I'm able to balance the teaching, research, and service, or clinical, if applicable, activities expected of me. We see a somewhat similar pattern. So those with visible disabilities, 45% disagreed. That jumps to 55%. So more than half the people with invisible disabilities were disagreeing that they're able to balance the expectations of work. And that's compared to folks with no disability at 35%. And last with these, I have been able to find the right balance for me between my personal and professional life. And people with visible disabilities, that was about 47% who disagree. Those with invisible disabilities, it jumps to 58%, so more than half, and it drops down to 37% for folks that have no disability. Now, I will say that I think it's a problem that there's 40% who, without disability, are not finding balance here as well, but there's a big difference, and that's the point here. So we put out a call within our membership at UW and simply asked, what would you want your peers to know? Because we're doing this peer group conversation, lunch and learn. And we got a number of insightful quotes back, and I have several of these here, and there's more available to you through the URL. So I'm going to hit on a few of them, but we thought it was important to give voice to your colleagues who are talking about their experience here. So this is direct, it's not abstracted, and this is the kind of thing that we got back from people. The accommodations needed and ways in which neurodivergence shows up varies from person to person, even among people with the same form of neurodivergence. Sometimes people who have difficulties or delays in fully processing information given to them orally will think they understand it and that they will remember the instructions. Sometimes they are right, and sometimes the information has completely disappeared before they get back to their desk. This doesn't mean they were lying when they said they got it or that they don't care. My hyperfocus is among my superpowers. You neurotypicals get training to find psychological flow state, and this is a common occurrence for me. It is, however, also responsible for my time blindness and always being late and having no clue how long tasks take. Please understand that brief pauses in conversation while I search for the right word don't need to be filled. Silence can be a great way to strengthen your patience. It allows us to be mindful and present in the moment. If you need to meet with someone, say why. Many people with anxiety will immediately jump to the conclusion that they may have done something wrong. If you can't say specifically what it is, then be direct about the tone of the meeting. For example, it's not bad, you're not in trouble, or hey, I want to talk to you about something I think you'll find interesting. People who need accommodations qualify because they're struggling. Don't pile on by challenging the legitimacy or fairness of what the DSO presents as reasonable. My focus and abilities can vary from high to low rather than being at a steady middle. Protecting my low times for self-care rather than pushing through doesn't make me a bad employee or mean that I can't do my job. However, I will be more productive if I can control my schedule and work in the ways that fit my cognitive profile. Direct communication is very helpful when people hint around something. I often miss it entirely, misinterpret it, or think I've misinterpreted it and get anxious about messing up. I love my job and the ability to spend my time contributing to the lofty enterprises of knowledge production and education. There are times that assumptions about what I should be able to do make me feel like a square peg in a round hole. And last, my experience at UW has been one of not being considered socially acceptable, in that I do my work as well or better than my peers, but since I do not do it in the preferred way, I get treated lesser in most situations. Like many autistics, I do not enjoy small talk, team building, or taking time to socialize before getting to the point. While I have always viewed being efficient an asset in medicine, it's considered rude and disrespectful. This has led to colleagues and managers treating me in ways that if I reacted in a more neurotypical manner, they would never dare to do. I also see a large amount of hypocrisy in that medicine has whole offices dedicated to equity and well-being, but the lens is always focused on socially acceptable ways to be. The main thing I would want the presentation to get across is that assumptions of only one right way to be in the workplace is counterproductive and oh, I'm having one of my moments, antithetical, skipping that word, to what UW claims its values are. So I want to underscore that part of what comes through are always going to be the challenge points, but common among neurodivergents are a number of strengths as well. So what you have seen are glimpses of the ways in which executive function in particular tends to be a juncture where folks that identify as neurodivergent have challenges. So it can be difficulties with short-term and working memory, attention regulation, planning, prioritizing, organizing, and time management. All the literature usually underscores to remember that most times people don't have trouble with all these things. So it's a very unique configuration about what this looks like for people. But on the flip side, particularly with spiky profiles, you have some real strengths with things. So that may result in very strong comprehension and creativity. You may conversely have strong memory. You've got out of the box thinking, attention to detail, hyper focus, great pattern recognition, incredible empathy, critical thinking and problem solving, and a passion for social justice and fairness.
Great. Thank you so much, Rochelle. This is Kate speaking. So some common challenges for neurodivergent employees, they can really vary greatly from person to person, as Michelle highlighted earlier. Some common challenges reported by neurodivergent employees, family members, advocates, providers of work supports and services, they can include social skills, organization, concentration, sensory issues. That could be light, smell, sound. For me in particular, like tags on clothing or soap detergents can make my skin really feel uncomfortable. So I have to be careful about what kind of products I buy and clothing brands I buy. Time management. This is also something known as time agnosia or time perception differences could be involved in this piece, also known as time blindness. Performing work effectively. So according to neurotypical societal standards, we may have to fit into certain lanes or boxes within our roles that just don't benefit the organization or or us as individuals who tend to be more on the creative side and can point out certain things that others can't. Stress management is pretty challenging as well. If we have to set shift, move from task to task quickly, or have multiple priorities, this can really create a lot of stress. Interaction with coworkers, this could involve maybe social anxiety that comes along with certain neurodiversities. Rejection sensitive dysphoria is pretty common as well within ADHD and other neurodiversities, and speaking and communicating. So some questions to consider regarding these challenges in the workplace could be, what limitations is the employee experiencing? How do these limitations affect the employee and the employee's job performance? What specific job tasks are problematic as a result of these limitations? What accommodations are available to reduce or eliminate these problems? Are all possible resources being used to determine possible accommodations? And then once accommodations are in place, would it be useful to meet with the employee and evaluate the effectiveness of the accommodations and determine whether additional accommodations are needed? And then lastly, do supervisory personnel and employees need training? So I mentioned earlier with sensory perception can be a real challenge and also a real risk amongst neurominority individuals. Sometimes we tend to have a meltdown, which is defined as an intense response to overwhelming situations. And again, that could be triggered by sensory sensitivity. Overwhelm could be caused by pain. I've personally had panic attacks, for example, when I've had certain procedures done with a lot of pain. Bright hospital lights can cause meltdowns, background noises, smells, continued changes in environment, and the list goes on. That's not an expansive list. Thank you.
So part of what we wanted to be doing here today was contextualizing that when you're dealing with an individual, there is a body of knowledge, and this may not, this is doublespeak, right? It's both, there's the individual in front of you and you need to pay attention to what they're telling you and what might be helpful, and things like a meltdown or complaining about the lights or the smells actually is embedded in a larger context that is not uncommon for folks that have neurodivergence. I'm also going to underscore that, again, there are people for whom accommodations may be needed and may be a legal obligation because they've been able to actually navigate and get a diagnosis. But there may be a number of people that could qualify if they had better access to providers and to navigating that system. And all of this is on a continuum. So part of what we want to be talking about is giving you an idea of what kinds of accommodations might be appropriate. And this information is coming out of Ask Jan. So this is national collated information around common accommodations for these kinds of symptoms. But if you begin to parse this out and think about in what ways can we just have more flexible workspaces, can we give each other a bit more grace, and can we be as fluid as possible? And that's not always possible in all contexts, but frequently there's a little bit more degrees of freedom than we currently operate with. So that would be one thing that we wanted to talk about. So some of those common accommodations would be traditional, setting up traditional or peer mentoring, having frequent or ongoing manager feedback, purposely using a strengths perspective and positive reinforcement. A person might have a service or an emotional support animal. There's all kinds of assistive technology and or remote work or different work locations, job task restructuring. So that may have to do with who does what, or rotations, or timing of things. It may be offloading some of the marginal job duties. That goes into workplace modifications, including flexible breaks, to make better use of autonomy for concentration levels and getting up, shifting, so forth when they need to. Modifications for sensitivities for things like noise, temperature, light, and the kind of light, right? Access to employee support programs, and then skills training. One of the things that's nice about the Ask Jan space is that there are multiple ways of looking up information. So you can also look up information based off of specific symptom. So for executive function challenges, there's a laundry list of potential interventions, combinations. And what we have here are a couple kind of representatives. So there's a cluster of things within technology. This may be things to help with organization, focus, time, pacing, planning. There may be support interventions put into place, things like job coaching, job restructuring, reducing marginal functions. Again, things around communication, paying attention to what the person in front of you tells you they really need in terms of communication. So for some folks, that's going to be they need it in bullet points or in writing. Some people need to talk it out or be able to receive information and verify it back with you. You may need, the person may need recordings or specific kinds of checklists, flow charts, messages, those types of things. If we look at issues around time management, there's technology assistance for that. But another thing might be just identifying and owning it and helping them come up with a support person in the workplace that can help prioritize and come up with to-do lists or flow charts, a mentor, if you will. For things around attentiveness and concentration, again, paying attention to the workplace environment itself. So there may be things like headphones or panels installed that are noise absorbing and so forth, maybe desk organizers and what have you. And then technology, again, would be options. For folks that have hyperactivity or impulsivity, workplace might be doing a private workspace or more teleworking. Supports, again, might be adjustment to the supervisory style, getting an outside job coach or support through EAP services, things to help with focus and concentration. Again, things around noise, and I've covered some of that, workflow. It's really important, folks that struggle to gain focus and concentration, if it's disrupted, particularly if there are memory or working memory issues, the need to have uninterrupted, protected time is really important. So in what ways can we go into our work world together, thinking through how we might give more autonomy or just make it part of the culture that it would be a norm that people would block out certain amounts of time for a given task and maybe get back to returning emails or so forth at another juncture. And these are all going to be kind of role dependent, but thinking through what are the expectations and what are our degrees of freedom with this. And that is going to be true with all of this. So memory loss, that again, there's a number of technological things that may help with that, and a number of supports in addition to getting a mentor or so forth. There might be some assistance around task separation, so breaking out the tasks. doing adaptive supervision or just anticipating extra time with training or tasks.
All right, and this is Christine speaking. As we're about to kind of transition into our Q&A section here, I just wanted to mention, as has been put in the chat a couple of different times, there's a Google folder with a bunch of resources in it. One is the slides in a PDF format that is hopefully digitally accessible. And then the second one is a full list of those example accommodations, some of which Michelle went over, but there's a much bigger list in there from the Ask Jan or Job Accommodation Network. And there is also a list of references and recommendations from your UW peers, some resources we think might be really helpful for you, some of which were cited in this, and then the full comments from our DSFA membership of what your neurodivergent peers would like you to know, a lot of which Michelle had read out, but there's a full list of those as well. I'll go ahead and throw those in the chat again, but they also should have been emailed out. And I think with that, we're moving into our Q&A.
I just wanted to say before we do transition to the Q&A, excellent presentation. I learned so much, and I have no idea how you packed all of that information in such a short time, and it was so engaging. And I particularly appreciated when you shared the lived experiences of those folks that do identify as neurodivergent. That for me was very valuable as someone that does not identify as neurodivergent, just so I can be more cognizant about helping support my colleagues to perform their best work. So I just appreciate that, and those folks that were vulnerable enough to share those authentic experiences. And with that, please, everyone, feel free to ask any of your questions. I know the chat was kind of on fire, but if you'd like to raise your hand, you're welcome to do that, or chat me directly if you're uncomfortable putting it into the main chat.